Video from the International Federation of Sport Climbing in Seoul, South Korea, shows Iranian sport climber Elnaz Rekabi in competition without a hijab. An Iranian female competitive climber left South Korea on Tuesday after competing at an event in which she climbed without her nation's mandatory headscarf covering, authorities said. Farsi-language media outside of Iran warned she may have been forced to leave early by Iranian officials and could face arrest back home, which Tehran quickly denied. The decision by Elnaz Rekabi to forego the headscarf, or hijab, came as protests sparked by the September 16 death in custody of a 22-year-old woman have entered a fifth week. Mahsa Amini was detained by the country's morality police over her clothing. The demonstrations, drawing school-age children, oil workers and others to the street in over 100 cities, represent the most serious challenge to Iran's theocracy since the mass protests surrounding its disputed 2009 presidential election. A later Instagram post on an account attributed to Rekabi, a multiple medalist in competitions, described her not wearing a hijab as unintentional, though it wasn't immediately clear whether she wrote the post or what condition she was in at the time. Rekabi left Seoul on a Tuesday morning flight, the Iranian embassy in South Korea said. The BBC's Persian service, which has extensive contacts within Iran despite being banned from operating there, quoted an unnamed informed source who described Iranian officials as seizing both Rekabi's mobile phone and passport. Watched level of anger at regime not seen in years, human rights activist. A revolutionary moment, says lawyer on Iran's protests duration 439 lawyer, human rights activist and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute Kaveh Shahrouz says Iran is on the precipice of change as people continue to protest against the regime despite brutal crackdowns. BBC Persian also said she initially had been scheduled to return on Wednesday, but her flight apparently had been moved up unexpectedly. Iran Wire, another website focusing on the country founded by Iranian-Canadian journalist Maziar Bahari, who once was detained by Iran, alleged that Rekabi would be immediately transferred to Tehran's notorious Evin prison after arriving in the country. Evin prison was the site of a massive fire this weekend that killed at least 8 prisoners. Later Tuesday, South Korea's foreign ministry acknowledged that the Iranian athlete and her team had left the country, without elaborating. In a tweet, the Iranian embassy in Seoul denied all the fake, false news and disinformation regarding Rekabi's departure on Tuesday. But instead of posting a photo of her from the Seoul competition, it posted an image of her wearing a headscarf at a previous competition in Moscow, where she took a bronze medal. Rekabi didn't put on a hijab during Sunday's final at the International Federation of Sport Climbing's Asia Championship, according to the Seoul-based Korea Alpine Federation, the organizers of the event. Federation officials said Rekabi wore a hijab during her initial appearances at the one-week climbing event. She wore just a black headband when competing Sunday, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had a white jersey with Iran's flag as a logo on it. Demonstrators chant slogans while marching during the March of Solidarity for Iran in Washington, D.C., on Saturday. The later Instagram post, written in the first person, offered an apology on Rekabi's behalf. The post blamed a sudden call for her to climb the wall in the competition, although footage of the competition showed Rekabi relaxed as she approached and after she competed. It also sought to describe her travel back to Iran on Tuesday as being on schedule. Rekabi was on Iran's 11-member delegation, comprised of 8 athletes and 3 coaches, to the event, according to the federation. Federation officials said they were not initially aware of Rekabi competing without the hijab but looked into the case after receiving inquiries about her. They said the event doesn't have any rules on requiring female athletes wearing or not wearing headscarves. However, Iranian women competing abroad under the Iranian flag always wear the hijab. Our understanding is that she is returning to Iran, and we will continue to monitor the situation as it develops on her arrival, the International Federation of Sport Climbing, which oversaw the event, said in a statement. It is important to stress that athletes' safety is paramount for us and we support any efforts to keep a valued member of our community safe in this situation. The federation said it had been in touch with both Rekabi and Iranian officials, but declined to elaborate on the substance of those calls when reached by the Associated Press. The federation also declined to discuss the Instagram post attributed to Rekabi and the claims in it. Hundreds killed in protest. Rekabi, 33, has finished on the podium 3 times in the Asian Championships, taking 1 silver and 2 bronze medals for her efforts. Iran has not offered a death toll in weeks. Demonstrations have been seen in over 100 cities, according to the group Human Rights Activists in Iran. Thousands are believed to have been arrested. Front burner 27-16. The long fight for women's rights in Iran since the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in the custody of Iran's morality police on September 16. Protests have erupted throughout Iran and in some 160 cities around the globe, with some of the biggest protests happening here in Canada. Despite violent crackdowns on the demonstrations in Iran, protesters are still coming out to the streets, and women have remained at the forefront, at times burning their headscarves or chopping off their hair. But this is far from the first time that women have led protest movements in the country. So today we're taking a look at how the Mahsa Amini demonstrations fit into a long history of women's activism in Iran, and whether or not this time feels different. Our guest is Mona Tajali, an associate professor of international relations and women's, gender, and sexuality studies at Agnes Scott College. She's also the author of the recent book Women's Political Representation in Iran and Turkey, demanding a seat at the table. Gathering information about the demonstrations remains difficult, however. Internet access has been disrupted for weeks by the Iranian government. Meanwhile, authorities have detained at least 40 journalists, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Iranian officials, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, have repeatedly alleged the country's foreign enemies are behind the ongoing demonstrations, rather than Iranians angered by Amini's death and the country's other woes. Iranians have seen their life savings evaporate, the country's currency, the rial, plummet, and Tehran's nuclear deal with world powers has been reduced to tatters.